I'm not a second-generation rich kid. But I drive a Ferrari. My family doesn't have billions in assets. But I have more money than I can spend. I'm Caleb. I have one job description. Keep Wall Street business giant Eleanor stress-free and satisfied. Physically. My hourly rate makes lawyers weep. And I live in luxury that most people only see on TV. But the golden handcuffs are tight. I'm on standby 24/7. My body is her gym. Her stress ball or amusement park. One Tuesday night, Eleanor hit the shower. After a particularly grueling board meeting that ended in our bedroom. I was catching my breath. Doing a few crunches on the edge of the custom Italian mattress. To keep the blood flowing. I checked my ABS in the vanity mirror. Perfect symmetry. It's part of the contract. Suddenly, her work phone on the nightstand buzzed. It wasn't her business line. It was the private one. Curiosity killed the cat. But boredom makes you do stupid but things. I glanced at the screen. That was wild, baby. When can I get back inside you? My blood ran cold. Eleanor had a side piece. I'm the side piece. She has a side piece. I placed the phone back down with surgical precision. My hands were steady. Deep down. A bitter laugh bubbled up. Poor Eleanor. Running an empire is hard work. Why shouldn't she outsource her entertainment to more than one vendor? She exited the bathroom wrapped in silk smelling of lavender and power. Caleb, she commanded softly. Dry my hair. Yes, ma'am. I picked up the dryer, smiling my trademark vacant pretty boy smile. The next morning, Eleanor was radiant. She looked like she'd eaten a soul for breakfast. Probably mine or maybe the guy from the text message. She sat on the edge of the bed. Sliding sheer black stockings up her impossibly long legs. She tossed an American Express Centurion card onto the duvet. I have the charity ball at the Met tomorrow. You're my +1. Buy a new tux. Make sure you don't embarrass me. Understood, Mississippi St. James. I grinned, snatching the black metal card before she could stand. I pulled her down for a rough breath-stealing kiss. I played the role of the obsessed lover perfectly. She smirked, patted my cheek like I was a golden retriever. And walked out to her waiting private elevator. Once she was gone, my face dropped. The smile vanished. I slumped back onto the pillows. Jealousy? Please. I'm a professional. I don't catch feelings. I catch checks. But Eleanor wasn't just a boss. She was intoxicating. There was a demon in the boardroom and a succubus in the bedroom. But I'm not stupid. This ride has an expiration date. I spent the afternoon burning a hole in her credit card at Tom Ford. Getting fitted for a suit. That cost more than my foster parents made in a decade. By evening, I wanted a drink. A real drink, not the expensive champagne Eleanor kept in the fridge. I texted Marcus. We met at the Viper Room. Heavily disguised. Marcus. A failed actor turned bartender. Laughed as I downed a tequila shot. So the Ice Queen let you off the leash, Marcus? Gee, weird. Stealing a lion wedge. She's prepping for a merger. I lied, signaling for another round. Busy week. Marcus leaned in. His expression dropping the joke. Bullshit, man. The word on the street isn't a merger. It's a marriage. My hand froze halfway to my mouth. What you didn't hear. The St. James family is finalizing a union with the Dude Pond. Shipping heir, old money marrying new money. It's gonna be the wedding of the century. Caleb. She's locking down a husband. The tequila suddenly tasted like battery acid. Start talking, I growled. Engagement party is being planned. Rumor is she's cleaning house before the ring goes on. You know what that means, right? You're getting severed. Hope you saved your cash. Pretty boy. I stared at the neon lights reflecting off the wet bar. A husband. The text message, baby. When can I get back inside you? It wasn't a random hookup. It was the fiancé. A heavy, sickening feeling settled in my gut. We had a contract. No emotional attachments. I was just a barrier against the gold diggers. A warm body for cold nights. If she's marrying DuPont, I'm trash. I need some air, I muttered, tossing cash on the bar. I shoved through the sweaty, grinding bodies on the dance floor needing nicotine. The VIP section of the Viper Room is elevated overlooking the peasants. As I tried to slip past the velvet rope toward the back exit, I looked up and there she was. Eleanor, not in a business suit. She was wearing a dress that was basically black paint, sprayed over her curves. It had a slit that went up to her hip. She was flanked by men in suits. They were laughing, toasting her. She was throwing her head back, laughing. A genuine laugh I rarely heard. And next to her, with his hand possessively on her lower back, was a substantial-looking blonde guy. Chiseled jaw, Patrick Felipe. Watch Dupont. I gripped my unlit cigarette so hard it snapped. So this is the business meeting. Eleanor turned her head, scanning the crowd. Her eyes sharp as a hawk, swept over the area. I ducked instinctively. I'm supposed to be at home tucked in bed like a good little toy. If she sees me here, I'm finished. I scrambled toward the back alley exit. Heart hammering. I needed to leave now. I pushed open the heavy steel door, spilling out into the damp, trash-filled alleyway. The bass from the club was muffled here. I leaned against the brick wall, lighting a fresh cigarette with shaking hands. 3 years. I'd given her 3 years of absolute obedience. And I was finding out about her. Wedding from a bartender? Get off me. A shrill scream cut through my pity party. Check that. 2 guys, looking like frat brothers on steroids, were dragging a girl toward a darkened SUV. Ideally, the girl was wasted, barely able to stand. Relax, honey. One guy sneered, groping her chest. We're just having an after party. I sighed. Not my business. I have my own problems. But the girl's eyes rolled back, terrified. I snapped my cigarette toward the nearest guy. The burning tip hit his eye. Damn, he howled, releasing me instantly. Let her go, I said, voice flat. Who do you think you are, Batman? The second guy stepped up, swinging a wild punch. I didn't even blink. I sidestepped, grabbed his wrist and twisted until something snapped. He howled. I drove a knee into his solar plexus, feeling him collapse like a sack of potatoes. The first guy charged. I swept his leg and kicked him square in the ribs while he was down. Violence is messy, but it's honest. Unlike Eleanor, the girl slumped against the wall, sobbing. I called a cab on my phone. Get in, lock the doors, I told her as it pulled up. As I turned around to wipe a smudge of blood off my knuckle, I saw a silhouette standing by the club's rear exit. The smell of expensive perfume hit me first. Caleb, her voice was like liquid nitrogen. Eleanor was standing there, her arms crossed the side, slit of her dress revealing that lethal leg. Playing the hero, she asked, her eyes darting from the beaten men to my face. I took a step closer. The alley light cast shadows on her face. I thought you were in bed. I can explain. I started using my best cocky teenager voice. He didn't let me finish. She grabbed my tie and yanked me down to her level, staring into my eyes. In the car, her Maybach was idling at the end of the alley. The ride home was suffocating. The driver's partition was up. Eleanor sat on the leather bench staring at her phone. Suddenly, she tossed the phone aside and lunged at me. It wasn't a hug. It was a claim. She bit my lip hard enough to draw blood. Her hands were everywhere, tearing at my shirt, gripping my belt. You disobeyed me, she whispered against my neck, her hands sliding dangerously lower. You lied to me. I shut up. She pushed me back against the door. Tonight you earn your forgive. I'm going to use you until you can't walk. And God help me. I let her. It wasn't love. It was a transaction. It was punishment. It was primal rage wrapped in lust. She wrote me like she was trying to erase a memory. Or maybe trying to forget who she was becoming. By the time we got back to the penthouse, I was exhausted. I carried her to the master suite. She was asleep before her head hit the pillow. Mascara slightly smudged. I sat on the edge of the bed watching her chest rise and fall. She looked innocent, like an angel. A deceitful, engaged angel. Her phone buzzed again on the nightstand. DuPont family, the dress fittings are scheduled for Thursday in Paris. Don't be late. I stared at the screen. Then another message from her assistant. Contracts are ready. The prenup with DuPont basically guarantees the merger. Congratulations, Mrs. DuPont to be. I looked back at Eleanor. I wasn't a boyfriend. I wasn't even a lover, really. I was a loose end. A toy she kept on the shelf until the real owner came home. I quietly stood up. I walked to the walk-in closet and pulled out a duffel bag. I didn't pack the suits she bought. I didn't take the watches. I took my own hoodies, my worn-out sneakers. And the wad of cash I'd been squirreling away for 3 years. I checked my bank account on my phone. The balance was high, very high. Time to cash out, I whispered to the empty room. I walked back to where she slept. And placed the black Centurion card on the nightstand. Next to her phone. Goodbye. Mississippi St. James. I closed the door softly. The penthouse loop was broken. The elevator ride down felt different this time. Didn't feel like I was leaving home. It felt like I was escaping. Rain in Queens hits different than the rain on the Upper East Side. In Manhattan, rain is an inconvenience that gets wiped away by doormen. In Queens, it smells like wet asphalt and old garbage. I checked into a motel that charged by the hour. But let me pay for a week up front in cash. I threw my bag on the bed. The mattress sagged in the middle. And the sheets smelled like bleach and someone else's bad decisions. It was a far cry from the 1,000 thread count. Egyptian cotton I woke up on. This morning. I sat in the dark. Staring at the blinking red light of the smoke detector actor. My body hurt, not from the fight at the club. But from her. My back still stung from where her nails had dug in. My lip was still swollen from her bite. It was a physical withdrawal. I was addicted to the toxicity. I pulled out a burner phone I bought at a bodega on the way over. I had tossed my old iPhone into a trash can on Fifth Avenue. I shouldn't have turned it on. But I'm a masochist. I dialed my old number just to see if she'd noticed. I checked the cloud account linked to my old iPad, which I still had in my bag. Notifications were flooding in. 10 a.m., where are you? The driver is waiting. 10 a.m., pick up the phone. Caleb. This isn't funny. 11 a.m. I found the card. You think you can buy your freedom. 12 p.m., you belong to me. If you don't walk through that door in 1 hour, I will burn this city down to find you. I stared at the glowing screen of the iPad until my eyes burned. The threat was not a metaphor. Eleanor St. James possessed the capital and the cruelty to systematically dismantle my existence. She would freeze my offshore accounts, frame me for embezzlement, and hunt me across continents simply because I had bruised her ego. I tossed the tablet onto the sagging mattress and rubbed my face with trembling hands. The cheap motel walls seemed to shrink around me, smelling of stale smoke and desperation. I was a fool to think a duffel bag of cash and a burner phone could sever the invisible leash she kept around my neck. My body still hummed with the phantom electricity of her touch. The bruises on my back were a physical receipt of my own pathetic addiction to her toxicity. I stood up and paced the narrow room, my sneakers sticking slightly to the grimy linoleum. Running was a delay of execution, not a pardon. If I wanted my life back, I had to stop acting like a fugitive and start acting like the shark she had trained me to be. I walked back to the bed and picked up the iPad. I bypassed the barrage of threatening messages and opened a hidden partition in the hard drive. For 3 years, I had been more than just a warm body in her penthouse. I had been her silent shadow, picking up discarded encrypted drives, memorizing passcodes, and quietly copying her corporate espionage files. I was supposed to be the empty-headed pretty boy. Nobody ever suspects the toy on the shelf of holding the keys to the kingdom. I opened the massive dossier labeled with the DuPont family crest. Eleanor thought she was merging her shipping empire with old European money to secure a monopoly. She thought she was buying a husband who would look good in a tuxedo and stay out of her boardroom. But Patrick DuPont was not a decorative aristocrat. I scrolled through the unredacted financial forensics I had compiled over the last 6 months. DuPont's shipping lines were drowning in shadow debt, leveraged against assets that didn't exist. He wasn't marrying Eleanor to share an empire. He was executing a hostile parasite protocol disguised as a prenuptial agreement. The contract she was supposed to sign tomorrow had a buried clause regarding majority shareholder voting rights in the event of a merger restructuring. DuPont had already bought out 3 of Eleanor's most trusted board members. The moment the ink dried on the marriage certificate, he would trigger a vote of no confidence. He would strip her of her title, absorb her liquid assets to pay his debts, and leave her with nothing but a hollow name. Eleanor, the untouchable ice queen of Wall Street, was walking blindfolded into a slaughterhouse. A cold, bitter laugh echoed in the empty motel room. Karma was finally coming to collect her debts. I could throw the iPad in the East River, board a cargo ship to South America, and watch her burn from a beach in Belize. She deserved it. She had treated me like a disposable commodity, a stress ball wrapped in human skin. But as I stared at her name on the glowing screen, a sickening realization washed over me. I didn't want her to burn. I hated her with a passion that felt exactly like love, and I realized nobody was allowed to destroy Eleanor St. James except me. I checked the time on the burner phone. It was 4 in the afternoon. The engagement gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art began at 8. I unzipped my duffel bag and pulled out the single piece of luxury I had accidentally packed. It wasn't the Tom Ford suit she bought me, but a bespoke black velvet dinner jacket I had purchased with my own money a year ago. I stripped off my damp hoodie and took a freezing shower in the rusted stall. I shaved with a cheap disposable razor, watching my eyes in the cracked mirror. The vacant, pretty boy smile was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who had nothing left to lose. I dressed methodically, the velvet jacket fitting like a layer of armor over my bruised ribs. I transferred the DuPont files to a secure, encrypted flash drive and slipped it into my inner pocket. I left the iPad on the bed, entirely wiped of its memory. The rain had turned into a relentless downpour by the time I stepped out of the motel. I flagged down a battered yellow cab and told the driver to head to the Upper East Side. The city blurred past the rain-streaked window, a neon smear of gray and gold. My heart hammered a steady, violent rhythm against my chest. I was walking back into the lion's den, armed with nothing but a piece of plastic and my own broken pride. The taxi dropped me off 3 blocks from the Met. The museum steps were illuminated by 100 floodlights, flanked by a sea of paparazzi holding massive umbrellas. Black SUVs lined Fifth Avenue, disgorging billionaires, politicians, and socialites. I didn't attempt the front entrance. I knew the security protocols because I had spent 3 years studying the men who guarded her. I slipped down a flooded side alley leading to the museum's loading docks. The service entrance was heavily guarded, but I knew the shift change happened exactly at 8:15. I waited in the shadows behind a dumpster, the rain soaking through my jacket, chilling me to the bone. At 8:14, the 2 guards stepped into the security booth to sign the digital handover log. I moved silently across the wet asphalt, slipping through the heavy steel door just before it clicked shut. I was inside. I navigated the subterranean concrete corridors with the confidence of an apex predator. I bypassed the catering kitchens and took a service elevator up to the first floor. When the elevator doors opened, the muffled sound of a string quartet drifted through the halls. I stepped out into the corridor bordering the Egyptian art wing. I adjusted my cuffs, checked my reflection in the glass of a display case, and walked into the Great Hall. The opulence of the party was nauseating. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over hundreds of people dripping in diamonds and deceit. Waiters glided through the crowd with trays of vintage champagne. I moved like a ghost, weaving through the clusters of oblivious aristocrats. My eyes scanned the room, searching for the only gravity that mattered in this artificial universe. I found her standing near the base of the grand staircase. Eleanor took my breath away. She wore a gown of liquid silver that clung to her curves, a slit exposing that impossibly long leg. Her blonde hair was pinned up in an intricate style, revealing the sharp, arrogant line of her jaw. She looked like a goddess carved from ice and ambition. And standing right beside her, his hand resting possessively on her waist, was Patrick DuPont. He was laughing at something a senator was saying, flashing a perfectly capped, predatory smile. Seeing his hand on her skin made my blood boil with a primal, territorial rage. I didn't care about the contract or the money in that moment. I just wanted to break his jaw. I forced my fists to unclench and stepped behind a massive floral arrangement. I needed to separate her from the herd. I caught the eye of a passing waiter and casually took a flute of champagne. I watched Eleanor's movements, waiting for the inevitable moment she grew bored of the sycophants. 10 minutes later, it happened. She gave DuPont a tight, practiced smile and whispered something in his ear. He kissed her cheek, and she turned away, walking toward the quieter corridors of the Temple of Dender exhibition. She was seeking a moment of silence. I placed my untouched champagne on a passing tray and followed her shadow. The Temple of Dender was housed in a massive glass atrium overlooking Central Park. The room was dimly lit, the ancient sandstone temple reflecting in the dark, still water of the reflecting pool. Eleanor stood alone at the edge of the water, looking out at the rain lashing against the glass walls. She let out a long, exhausted sigh, her shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. I stepped out from behind a stone pillar. The sound of my footsteps echoed softly on the polished stone floor. She stiffened instantly, the armor slamming back into place before she even turned around. When her eyes met mine, the air in the massive room seemed to instantly evaporate. Her blue eyes widened in genuine shock, a rare crack in her flawless porcelain mask. Then, the shock morphed into a fury so absolute it practically radiated heat. She asked me if I had a death wish, her voice a deadly, quiet hiss. I stopped a few feet away from her, keeping my hands visible at my sides. I told her I was just returning a favor. She took a step toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the stone. She reminded me that she had given me 1 hour to return to the penthouse. She promised she would have my legs broken and my body thrown into the Hudson for defying her. I didn't flinch. I looked her up and down, taking in the silver dress and the diamonds glittering at her throat. I told her she looked beautiful, but the man standing next to her was a corpse in a tuxedo. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. She ordered me to explain myself before she signaled her security detail to drag me out by my hair. I reached into my velvet jacket and slowly pulled out the black flash drive. I held it up between us, the small piece of plastic catching the dim light of the museum. I told her this was her empire. I explained that I had spent the last 6 months mirroring her private servers because I knew she was blind when it came to old money. She scoffed, a harsh sound that echoed off the ancient Egyptian stone. She accused me of being a jealous, dramatic child throwing a tantrum because his credit card was declined. I closed the distance between us, ignoring the primal alarm bells ringing in my head. I stopped inches from her face, staring down into those terrifying blue eyes. I told her Patrick DuPont was broke. I watched her breath hitch, the absolute certainty in my voice piercing her arrogance. I explained that his shipping lines were insolvent and he was millions in debt to European shadow banks. I told her he had bought 3 of her board members and buried a majority shareholder takeover clause in the prenup. I stated clearly that if she said I do tomorrow, she would wake up the next morning as a minority figurehead in her own company. Eleanor stared at me, her mind working at a terrifying speed. She searched my face for a lie, for a trace of the petty vengeance she expected. She found nothing but cold, hard truth. She reached out and snatched the flash drive from my fingers. Her hand brushed mine, and we both flinched slightly at the electric contact. She looked down at the drive, then back up at me. She asked me why I brought it to her. Her voice was barely above a whisper, stripped of the commanding tone she used to terrorize Wall Street. She pointed out that I could have walked away with my offshore money and let him ruin her. She reminded me that she had treated me like property. I looked away from her, staring at the dark water of the reflecting pool. I confessed that I had considered it. I told her I sat in a disgusting motel room in Queens and imagined her losing everything. I turned my gaze back to her, stripping away my own armor. I told her that the thought of anyone else breaking her made me physically sick. I stepped closer, the scent of her lavender perfume washing over me like a drug. I whispered that she was a monster, but she was my monster. A heavy, suffocating silence fell between us. The faint music from the gala felt like it belonged to a different planet. Eleanor looked down at the flash drive gripped tightly in her manicured hand. A single, cynical laugh escaped her lips. She murmured that she was supposed to be the smartest person in any room. She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears of rage and betrayal. She asked me what I wanted for this information. She instantly reverted to the transactional nature of our dynamic, assuming everything had a price tag. She offered me $20 million, a seat on the board, and complete immunity. I shook my head slowly, a bitter smile touching my lips. I told her to keep her money. I explained that I didn't come here to negotiate a new contract. I came here to resign. Her jaw tightened, a flash of genuine panic crossing her face. She ordered me not to walk away from her. I told her the golden handcuffs were broken. I stepped back, putting distance between us. I advised her to take the drive to her private lawyers tonight, fire her compromised board members at dawn, and destroy Patrick DuPont before breakfast. I turned my back on her and started walking toward the exit. My heart was tearing itself apart in my chest, screaming at me to turn around and beg her to let me stay. But I knew that if I stayed under her terms, I would eventually turn into dust beneath her heel. I had to leave to prove I was real. I heard her call my name. It wasn't a command this time. It was a question. It was the sound of a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, realizing the safety net was gone. I didn't stop. I walked out of the Temple of Dender, navigated the security corridors, and stepped back out into the freezing New York rain. I hailed a cab and headed straight for JFK Airport. I booked a first-class ticket on the next flight to London. I sat in the sterile luxury of the departure lounge, watching the rain streak the massive glass windows. I checked my burner phone one last time. There were no messages. No threats to burn the city down. Just an agonizing, empty silence. I boarded the plane, ordered a double whiskey, and watched the skyline of Manhattan disappear into the clouds. The next 48 hours were a blur of jet lag and isolation in a high-end London hotel. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't check the financial news on my laptop. I spent my days walking aimlessly through Hyde Park, trying to outpace the phantom scent of lavender. It was impossible. She was a virus in my bloodstream, a chronic condition I would have to manage for the rest of my life. On the third morning, a knock on my hotel room door shattered the quiet. I wasn't expecting housekeeping. I walked to the door, suddenly hyper-aware of my surroundings. I didn't look through the peephole. I unlatched the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Eleanor St. James was standing in the hallway. She wasn't wearing an evening gown or a power suit. She was wearing a simple black trench coat, her hair pulled back into a messy knot. She looked exhausted, the dark circles under her eyes a testament to sleepless nights and brutal warfare. But she also looked completely, terrifyingly victorious. She pushed past me without an invitation and walked into the center of the hotel room. I closed the door slowly, my heart threatening to crack my ribs. I asked her how she found me. She turned around and offered a weak, familiar smirk. She reminded me that she owned half the private surveillance satellites in the Western Hemisphere. I leaned against the door, crossing my arms over my chest to hide the shaking of my hands. I asked her how the wedding planning was going. Her smirk vanished, replaced by a cold, deadly seriousness. She stated that Patrick DuPont was currently in federal custody awaiting indictment for corporate fraud and extortion. She explained she had handed the files directly to the SEC and the FBI. She noted that the 3 board members who betrayed her had been stripped of their shares and blacklisted from the industry. She had burned his world to ashes. I nodded slowly. I told her I always admired her efficiency. Silence stretched between us, thick and unresolved. She didn't come to London just to give me a news update. She took a slow step toward me, unbuttoning her trench coat. She told me that sitting in her penthouse after destroying Patrick was the loneliest experience of her life. She confessed that the victory tasted like ash because the only person who had actually fought for her wasn't there to share it. I warned her not to play games with me. I told her I wasn't going back to being her secret amusement park. She stopped a few feet away. She looked at me with a vulnerability I had never seen in her before. She stated quietly that she didn't want a secret. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a thick legal document. She tossed it onto the glass coffee table. I asked her what it was. She explained it was a restructuring of St. James Enterprises. She told me she had created a new position on the executive board, granting full partnership and equal voting rights. She looked me directly in the eyes. She said my name was on the dotted line. I stared at the document, then back up at her face. I pointed out that I had no formal education in high finance and I was completely unqualified. She laughed, a genuine, raw sound that made my chest ache. She argued that I had single-handedly outmaneuvered a European banking syndicate and saved a billion-dollar empire. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. She whispered that I was exactly what she needed. She needed someone who wasn't afraid of her. She needed someone who would call her a monster to her face and then stand between her and the fire. I looked down at her, feeling the last remaining threads of my resistance snapping. I told her we were a disaster. I warned her that we were both too damaged, too aggressive, and too toxic to survive a real partnership. She reached up and cupped my face in her hands. Her skin was warm, the scent of lavender intoxicating. She agreed with me completely. She said we would probably burn each other to the ground eventually. But she promised it would be the most spectacular fire the world had ever seen. I looked into her eyes, seeing the reflection of my own broken soul staring back at me. She wasn't offering me a job, and she wasn't demanding my submission. She was offering me the other half of her heavy, bloody crown. I leaned down and captured her lips in a kiss that tasted like whiskey, rain, and absolute surrender. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision of equals, a brutal claiming of territory. Her hands tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, erasing the distance we had tried to put between us. I picked her up, my hands gripping her waist, and carried her toward the bed. The golden handcuffs were finally gone forever. We didn't need them anymore. We had built a cage entirely of our own design, forged in mutual destruction and an obsession that defied logic. I laid her down on the mattress, hovering over her, looking at the woman who had ruined my life and saved it in the same breath. I told her that if I signed that contract, she could never fire me. She pulled my head down, her lips brushing against my ear. She whispered that she never wanted to let me go. And God help me, I believed her.